Okay, cool. Yeah, so I was just thanking Synovate for the lovely space. Thank you for hosting this. And thanks to CISO and the GDG team. Yeah, thanks for having me today. Cool. So today I'll be speaking about Boardroom, which is a dating app designed for busy professionals. So picture this. The year is 2023. It's April, so it's about to be winter in Cape Town. Myself, I've just gotten out of a relationship. So the winter is going to be 3 times as cold for me. And it was that cold for me. You know, like blankets don't do you enough justice when it's winter and you've just gotten out of a relationship. So if you've never gotten out of a relationship just before winter, I don't recommend it. So about 4 weeks into this, wrestling with my blankets, trying to keep warm. I'm in Sea Point, so you have all the wind and it's like super cold. It's not a good vibe. 4 weeks into this, I realized, you know, maybe blankets aren't the solution to this. So I started looking for other solutions. So I opened up my app. I opened up my phone, went to the Play Store. I use the Play Store because I use an Android, not my iOS. Show of hands, like how many people here use an iPhone? Only 2. Wow. Times are changing, eh? But you see how quick they were to say I use an iPhone. So I went onto the Play Store and I downloaded some dating apps. And I opened up these dating apps, and to my surprise, I saw a horror show. It was a horror show all around, to say the least. And it was strange because when I was using these apps, I had come with the knowledge that people were paying for dating apps. So in my mind, the first thing that clicked is that if people are paying for this, and they're paying for what I'm seeing right now, then there's a big business opportunity here to create a dating app that's not a horror show. So the next challenge was, how was I going to do that? So through many iterations, I ended up coming up with the idea that I was going to design a dating app for busy professionals. It sort of turns out that professionalism is actually a very good proxy for being very well presented and sometimes well conducted. And I say sometimes. And I actually want to share this chart because I'm not pinned anymore. Anyways, it's fine. But I want to share this chart because, you know, why was my instinct in May of 2023, 4 weeks after my blankets didn't do me any justice, why did I go and download dating apps? So if you do some research online, you'll see that there's something called the loneliness pandemic. And over time, people have become more and more isolated. They live alone in their apartments, and their social circles have shrunk quite a bit. You go to work, maybe you start your commute at 7, you go home and you get home by 6, you're absolutely tired, you now need to make food, and then you go to bed. Very little time for socializing, never mind doing chores, right? So we've got this loneliness pandemic. And if you see this chart, you can actually see that before the internet became popular, a lot of people met their partners through friends, through work, through family, you know, their neighbors, etc., etc. But that is going down to 0. And you like, this is not a joke, it's going down to 0. Like you can see where the chart is going. And people are meeting each other online. More than 50% of couples in the States are meeting each other online. Of course, this is not to say it's just dating apps. Obviously, like Instagram, we send someone a DM. It's your Facebook, it's your Twitter, it's all social media. But that isn't in the same chart. This is 2020. We are 4 years later now, so it's gotten a lot worse. Or a lot better, depending on who you ask. If you're asking me, it's a lot better. So cool. So this brings me back to Boardroom. So it's May 2023, and I'm now sort of like thinking, you know, the dating apps that are out there are absolute garbage, and I need to design something better. So I start coding, you know, as you know, developers do. I'm coding like in the morning, I'm coding at night after work, and I'm sort of like slaving away for a month. After a month, I sort of sent this first version of the app to my friends, And I was like, hey guys, I'm building a dating app. And in fact, I'm going to give all of you an unfair advantage. So my friends looked at this and they just laughed at me. They were like, dude, how thirsty are you? But anyways, I was like, how bent on like making this work? So what I did next is I called the two people who I thought would help turn this into a success. So the first person I called is Darusha on the far right. So I did my MBA at UCT with Darusha. And yeah, honestly, she's like one of the best strategic thinkers that I've ever met. She's also a marketing genius and she has a large following on social media. So she's a social media influencer and that network has been very valuable to the business. The next person I called is Sarisha, who is now our CEO. So Sarisha, I met at a women in business event at the GSB, and I remember having a conversation with her, and in the first 5 minutes, I could tell how super passionate she was about startups. She was like almost like so obsessed about startups. And I saw the same obsession that I had, you know, when it was like midnight, didn't care about winter anymore. I was just like coding away. So I said, I have to work with Sarisha at some point. And here we are. We sort of formed a team and we built Boardroom. So I must admit, when we first built and launched Boardroom, I thought that the most difficult technical challenge that we would face would be designing the matching algorithm or the recommendation algorithm. It turns out quality control is a far bigger problem. And that's why when you download like these other dating apps, you go on and you see like just a horror show because the quality controls are not there. Quality control is one, very difficult, but it is also like the most important component of an online community. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But this brings me to the title of the talk, which is Love, Lies, and Algorithms. ChatGPT came up with that. Designing algorithms to keep your community safe. Cool. So my name is Wisani. I go by Wisani on Twitter. I don't like to hide under the guise of privacy. So you can follow me on Twitter. I go by the same on LinkedIn. The only thing I do keep private is my Instagram. You have to like request to follow me there. But yeah, that's me. Cool. So what I want to start with is this statement. And this is like the key takeaway from this talk. It's like the crux of this talk, which is you cannot have a successful online community without quality controls. Many social media giants have died because they didn't have quality controls. If you remember the time of MySpace, MySpace was completely obliterated by Facebook because they didn't have quality controls. You could go on there as Lindsay Lohan and make your name Space Eggs or whatever, and have an account. You could post sexually explicit content, and it just wasn't a vibe, right? It alienated their core user base. So Facebook came along and they said, listen, we are going to create a social media platform. We are only going to allow people with a .edu email address. They limited it to students, and they had a lot of content moderation on there. So what that did is it made it a safer community for people to be in. And as we know, a few years later, they completely took over MySpace. Why are quality controls so important to people, right? As I was like writing this slide, I was like, what is the answer to this question? And I came up with like quite a simple answer, really. Space here. Welcome. So why do people care so much about quality controls? Believe it or not, most people in the world are actually quite normal, right? If you look at a normal distribution, a lot of people actually sit at the center and are like within 2 standard deviations. People don't want to wake up at 10 a.m., go to the office, open up their Twitter feed and see porn. They don't want to do that. That's not what normal people want to see. Normal people want to consume normal content. And that's why this is so important. So if you're building an online platform, you got to make sure that there's no sexually explicit content. You got to make sure that there's no violence, there's no like racist sort of posts or anything like that. You have to take it very seriously, because if you don't, then you alienate the normal people, right? And then you're left with extremists. And then what you have to do is you have to get bots on your social media platform to sort of like make up the numbers. And I'm not pointing any fingers at any billionaires who bought social media platforms at all, but that's the reality. Cool. So we sort of see this quality control at Boardroom in sort of two categories. One is the user authenticity. So we got to make sure that everyone who's using Boardroom is a real person, right? And we do that by authentication. You sort of have to like use your email address to sign up, prove that it's your email address, very common stuff like industry practice. And then you have onboarding. In that onboarding, you have to connect your LinkedIn account to prove that you're a professional. So that sort of gives us confidence that this is your LinkedIn account and you're a professional. So that gives us a lot of that user authenticity. The next thing we do is quality control on the content itself. So it's not enough to have real people. You've got to make sure that they're behaving as well, right? You've got to make sure that they have high quality profiles. So our verification process is targeted at exactly that. So to use a platform, you have to be verified. And in order to be verified, you need to have a quality profile, right? Once, you look like you have a question.
No, just like verified is like the blue check.
The blue tick, except if you don't have a blue tick, you can't use the platform at all. So we're very strict.
Okay.
Yeah. Cool. And then once you're through the verification, you behaved enough to pass the verification, but this doesn't guarantee that you're going to keep behaving. So we need to have ongoing moderation. Our app is designed in a way where if you swipe right on someone, you have to leave a message. You can't just like sit on the toilet and right, which is what happens on other dating apps, right? And then you end up with people swiping right on people they don't really want to date. And when they match, it's like, oh, surprise, like, I don't really want to chat to this person. And then you end up with ghosting. So we make it, there's a lot of intent behind the swipes, but also the moderation. We moderate those messages using AI to ensure that someone isn't sending like dodgy messages on the platform. And if they are, we ban them. It's that simple. Cool. So I won't speak too much about onboarding and authentication because like this is like standard industry practice. What I'll do throughout this talk is I'll have some slides where I'll pause and you can ask questions. I'll sort of do like a 5-second awkward pause and we'll do some questions. Yeah, starting now. Does anyone have any questions about the onboarding and authentication?
I guess LinkedIn has its own process. So you also kind of just copying onto whatever process they have, which is a nice way to eliminate yourselves having to develop that whole part of it.
Yeah,
LinkedIn will have some form of authentication as well, right? To ensure that you're a real person.
Exactly.
So you're also utilizing what they've developed within your app to make sure that they are. It's not just to confirm that they're professional.
Yes, exactly. It's also the authentication.
Yeah.
So we use email authentication, which is like probably the weakest authentication you can imagine. So by tacking on LinkedIn authentication to that, we make it a little more secure.
And the question is there like some thought? Is there someone who looks at every account is registered or like, for example, just go through a physical person, just checks?
I'll get to that, but short answer, as you can see, my eyes are a bit red.
Yeah.
That's me. So I do a lot of the manual reviews. Yeah. Yes.
So I have a question regarding the moderation.
Yes.
You spoke about using AI to check if any of the content, for example, the text that we're having is
Safe.
yeah.
Yeah.
So now I'm thinking, okay, what about privacy? So could you please explain more about the privacy?
Yeah.
What if, for example, uses free key and they imagine a dating app, a professional dating app. What if the users want to be free key? What about their privacy?
Yeah. So we allow users to be freaky. They can be freaky, but like there's a question there about consent versus non-consent, right? The first message you send to someone, you guys are still strangers. You haven't matched yet. So at that point, we moderate that using AI over the air, and that is the only time we sort of like moderate a message. So to moderate that, we're using Perspective API. I'll touch a little bit about that, but it's developed by Google, and they don't store any of that data. It's just a processing layer. Okay. But afterwards, we do allow the freak. You can, once you've matched, you can, yeah.
So, for example, I have my LinkedIn profile, it looks nice and cute, but then my boardroom profile is a freaky one, and I say, pick me and freaky and love and what?
No, we don't allow that, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to like draw the line somewhere. And yeah, in that case, I guess it's like a little bit of an edge case. So yeah.
Something to think about.
Something to think about. Lols. Okay, cool. So profile verification. So like profile verification is probably like the biggest component of this. It's what keeps us awake at night. At least it keeps me awake at night, because if someone comes past and like I've done the manual review, it's like a little bit dangerous. But yeah, this is quite an important component. And yeah, I mean, I'm going to use the word like algorithm a lot in this, but that's just a fancy way of saying it's a JavaScript function. You know, it's like an algorithm. That's like just trying to sound fancy. But essentially, the verification algorithm is a Firebase cloud function. What that is, if you haven't used Firebase, which is like a nice set of tools for mobile app development or web app development, is we have a sort of NoSQL database in the cloud, in the Google Cloud, and we keep our user profiles over there in that database. So anytime a user updates their user profile, we then trigger this function, which checks if there are any like important changes. And if there are, then it runs the verification. Right? Verification can be one of three results. Either you're verified and you can start using the app, or you're rejected and you need to make some changes to your profile. And we try to make sure that the feedback loop here is pretty quick, so you know what to change and you can change it immediately. Or you get sent for manual review, which is the bane of my existence, because I then have to go and I check, okay, good photos, but I hate it, but that's what happens. If you get rejected more than 5 times, because I hate manual verification so much, then we threaten you with a permanent ban. It's not the friendliest UX, but it's effective, right? And it allows me to sleep at night. So that's the verification algorithm in a nutshell. Are there any questions at this point? No. Okay, cool. So like I said, the verification algorithm is just a JavaScript function. What it does is it runs some synchronous checks and some asynchronous checks. So it's like basic form validation, you know, like are your text inputs, do they look okay? Do you have enough photos? And then it runs some more sort of like expensive asynchronous checks, like facial detection and things like that. And I'll go deeper into those. Cool. So the first part is a synchronous sort of validation. We have this on the client side and on the Firebase cloud function. And this checks for things like, do you have enough photos? Does your bio make sense? Is your profile information complete? And this is just like simple JavaScript logic, right? Like there's nothing too complicated over here. Where it starts getting interesting is where we start doing the asynchronous checks. So this is a Perspective AI I spoke about. And what it does is it takes some text inputs and it scores them on toxicity, right? The greatest thing about this API is that it is free. I've never paid a cent for it. It is free. So if you run an online community, if you're ever going to run an online community, Perspective API is where it's at, right? So you go on your dating profile, you sort of update your bio and things like that. You give us all of that text. We take it, we throw it to Perspective API. Perspective API runs some machine learning on it, wrangles the data, and it comes back with a score on toxicity. You know, like how much profanity is in here, is there like identity attacks, things like that. So the Perspective API was built by 2 business units at Google, whose goal is to make sure that the internet is less abusive. And they've done a fantastic job. I can't actually say how much of a fantastic job they've done. So this is like the backbone of our verification. Cool. So like I said, if on your bio you have like extreme toxicity, you can fill in the blanks. I think blah, 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 people are blah, 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 and I would never date someone who's a blah, blah, blah. If we like see extreme toxicity over there, we'll ban you immediately. And this is a permanent ban. There's nothing you can do to reverse it. The reason why that's the case, I'll go to like a little bit of psychology. I don't believe that adult behaviors can be changed easily. So if you are extremely toxic, there is nothing that I can do as a dating app to change that, you know? So this is not something that we can predict. We immediately ban it, and like we track aliases on email addresses. We sort of like ban the LinkedIn account that it can't come back ever. So we've had quite a few profiles that have been banned. Question slide. Are there any questions at this point?
The question here.
You thought so already, not now, but at some point it's account gets hacked and someone just or something like this, and you ban them and you don't allow them at all to appeal.
That's a very good point. So if someone were to sort of like send us an email and say, hey, my account is banned, and they can prove that, you know, they were compromised, then we might look at that. So far that hasn't happened yet. But that's a very good point. I'll actually note that.
It has to do with the banning. So let's say I was hurt by Tabiso, and now I'm just going through my emotions and I just want to vent. Do I get banned? What if it's just in the moment thing?
Yeah.
And I've been hurt by one person on the dating app.
Dating
And
app.
I'm
So,
message to him indirectly.
oh, from your own profile.
My own profile.
Okay. So in that case, I would actually recommend, if you get a notebook and like you write down whatever you want to write down, write it down there and then like burn it. It will release the energy.
Yeah, understanding
But
them,
yeah.
sometimes we have.
Yeah. No, yeah, it's true. Like, I think that's the hardest thing about this like moderation. It's like you're dealing with people, number one, and you're dealing with relationships. And relationships like bring out the best in people, but also the worst in people. So it is quite a difficult one. Luckily, we haven't had a case like that, but I think that's also like something where it would be like case by case. So very well noted.
What if your phone is stolen? How do you prove that?
If your phone is stolen.
And the app is accessible, as in like you can get into the portal and start doing
Yeah.
things.
So that is like, there's nothing you can do there. If your phone is stolen, like you have much bigger problems because your banking apps are over there, your LinkedIn's over there, your Instagram is over there, your Facebook is over there. So yeah, biometrics on your phone. Like keep your phones very safe. Like if someone gets a hold of your phone, it is over.com. Make sure you have biometrics and passcodes.
I've got a question.
Yeah.
How does reporting of users work? As in, do you have an automated system that picks up, let's say, 10 reports and then auto bans them? Or do you have a reporting system if someone is misusing your platform? How does that moderation work?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So when we built the first version of Boardroom, we sort of like went to the Play Store and we didn't have any reporting or anything like that. Google then came up, or Google Play, they came up with some new policies to say that if you have a sort of like online community where people can message each other or see each other's posts, you have to have reporting functionality and blocking functionality. So since then, we created reporting functionality. And if a user is reported by 3 or more users, then that's also a lifetime ban.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's quite steep.
Yeah. Like, don't mess around. Don't mess around. Yeah. Yeah. Very few people have actually been banned. So like a lot of people actually observe the rules. Because a lot of people are normal. Like I've discovered that. Like I myself am not a normal person, but I was actually shocked to see how normal people are. Okay, cool. So I spoke a lot about the text sort of moderation using AI. The next thing we look at is photos. So photos are by far the most important component of a dating profile. Like by far, like when someone swipes right, they're swiping right on the photo. When you swipe left, it's on the photo. It's hardly to do with the content. In fact, when people are looking at the content, it's more to find reasons not to swipe right. So, if you have a good dating profile, and then in the content, you're like, what's a problematic dude again? Andrew Tate. So if you, in your profile, you're like, oh, Andrew Tate is the bomb.com, like I really like observing his philosophy. Then you're going to get a swipe left, right? Even if you're like very handsome. So the content itself is to find reasons to swipe left. I have nothing against Andrew Tate, guys. But the photos are very important. So in our verification, we have to sort of like look at those photos. So the first thing we look for is duplication. So we require at least 3 photos on a dating profile. And when some people see this, they just like take one photo and upload it 3 times. And like we're like, hey, you have duplicate photos. And then what they do is like they take the photo, they like crop it a little bit, or like they come up with all sorts of things. So I had to build like this sort of detection algorithm using Sharp.js, which is a JavaScript image processing library, to just check the dominant colors in the image. So if your dominant colors are too close, like, yeah, this is probably a duplicate image. So it's nothing fancy, like no one has been clever enough to sort of like change the colors in the photo. So when that day comes, I'll be in the algorithm.
Can I ask, is that happening locally or is it also applied to the cloud?
This is in the cloud. Yeah, so this is in the cloud function.
Can I also ask questions? So on my Instagram, I don't have photos of myself.
Yeah.
I take photos of like outside, like mountains, trees, and all that. So
Yeah.
does that count as like a picture of myself, or?
No, so people don't generally want to date mountains. But I'll get to that. Yeah, it's a good question. Cool. So the other thing that we do with Sharp.js, it turns out that like there aren't any good libraries for blur detection or any APIs for blur detection. So we've had to write our sort of own algorithm for this. The Google Cloud Vision API has some sort of like blur detection, but what I've learned is that like it focuses on the face and like tries to detect the blur on the face, and it's not really reliable for what we want. So we sort of wrote an algorithm which sort of like does a Laplace sort of like matrix scan on the image, which basically just means it looks for like every pixel with a 3x3 matrix, and it says how similar is this pixel to its neighboring pixels, and it does this across the entire image. And if there's not enough pixel variance, then we're like, this is probably a blurry photo. That alone is not a good enough sort of measure of blurriness, because if I take a very clear picture of myself with like a very black background, then there's little pixel variance in the black parts, right? So we couldn't rely on that alone. So the other thing we did is a Fourier transform to sort of like get the edges of an image. I like pretty much asked ChatGPT to write this for me. So while I have the terminology, like it's not like I was like, ooh, Fourier transform, I know how to do it. So ChatGPT writes a fantastic function to sort of like grayscale the image, like draw a histogram on like the edges. And if the edges are very like pronounced, then it's likely a clear image. For a while, I was just sitting on that, and like we had a lot of complaints that images were being tagged as blurry, and like I didn't know what to do. So I think it took me like 2 months of meditation to come up with the answer that, oh, like if an image is high resolution and a high image size, it's likely not blurry. So I added that to the algorithm, and yeah, we have a good blur detection algorithm going now.
Will the user get if they upload the photo, will it tell them immediately that it's blurry, or will they only get informed later on when you run those functions that run?
Yeah, so it's only once the functions are run. It will take about like 3 to 5 seconds to get that.
Okay, so you can give it to them before they actually accept and upload.
Yeah, exactly. So on onboarding, we actually have a screen where you have to upload at least 3 photos. And as you're uploading it, it will tell you that the photo is processing, and then it will be in a processing stage for like 3 seconds.
Okay, so the processing stage isn't actually always uploading, it's also checking.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Bit of trickery there.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next part is where we use the Google Cloud Vision API. Yes, question.
Sorry, yes. On the time.
On the time. Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm almost done. So what we do over here is we just check for faces. Mountains do not count as faces. And even doggos who are like very, very cute. We don't like accept that as a face. Like every doggo must be accompanied by a human face. And we need at least like 2 photos of your face. The 3rd photo can be a mountain, that's fine. You know, to show off your personality a little bit. The other thing we check for is image safety. We don't want anything too freaky over here. So like if there's like adult content or like medical content or violence, we don't want that. You gotta like manage your freaks, so to speak, so that the photo is safe. Cool. And so to date, you know, like in the beginning, like I was doing a lot of the manual verification myself. I'd say like 99% of all profiles, I had to sit there and verify myself, which was painstaking. I made a lot of mistakes, and it wasn't great. Today, 50% of the profiles that are verified through the verification algorithm. And so every time a profile is verified, I sort of get a notification to just check that the algorithm isn't hallucinating. And so far it's been good. But like I said, it did take us a while to get over here. So sort of from like July to like October, all of this verification was like done by me. And then only over here, the verification algorithm started kicking in. That manual verification did teach me a lot about what to look out for and how people were trying to cheat the system. So like it was very valuable. Okay, I'm going to skip past that because of time. And then finally, it's the ongoing moderation that we spoke about. So if you send the first message over here, we have to sort of moderate that to ensure that someone isn't sitting in the office at 10 a.m. With their boss, and then suddenly they get a notification to say, hi, XYZ, you look XYZ, I want to do XYZ to you. We don't want that. So before we send any notifications, we just have to check that there's no toxicity over there. Finally, like what also differentiates us from other dating apps is that we have a social feed, which works like Twitter almost. So if people post over here, we have to check that there obviously isn't any unsafe content. Instead of using Perspective API on its own over here, we want to check for some additional fields. Like one, to see if like this post is going to be damaging to the brand. So if someone says, you know, like all the people on this app sucks, this app totally sucks, then we obviously don't improve that. It's a bit like strong-armed, but we're into the last we measure social deviance as well. So like if your post is generally uncool, like don't post it. Like people ask for weird things. Like people want to see credit scores on profiles. They want like all sorts of filters that don't make sense. So we have to like stop that. And to do that, I just use ChatGPT. ChatGPT recently came out with a JSON schema. So you can say, I want this property and it's a type of number, and I want this property, it's a type of number, and this property, and it will always give you that schema back. It didn't always have that, but now it has it, and it's like super, super powerful. Cool. So all said and done, what does this give us? It gives us an app that is not a horror show, right? It gives us an app with real people who have complete profiles with well-represented photos, and are generally respectful to the community. And that's what makes it a safe dating community. And that's us. So we are Boardroom, and our mission is to help professionals everywhere find love. Cool.
Anyways, wonderful to see you all. Thank you all for having me. I apologize. I have a bit of a frog in my throat. One of the various small children around me managed to bring something home last week, and it's still working its way out. So hopefully I won't cough too much. Yeah, kind intro, Dario. I do have some slides that I think I can press the right button to pull up. We'll test my Google Meet. Foo, it's been a little while since I've been inside Google.
There we go.
Ta-da! Hi. Yeah, so anyways, I have a few slides that I can go through. Mostly it's just nice to say hi. Anyways, my name is Eric Seidel, as Dario said. I started the Flutter project 10 years ago, led the project until I left Google back in 2022 when I started a new company, which we'll talk about here in a minute. Yeah, and I've been working in this space for a very long time. I worked on browsers before this. So I'm speaking to a small room here, which is great. So please don't hesitate to stop me. I can blather on at you, but it's also nice. You're welcome to. I can see you very well in this camera, so please don't hesitate to stop me. So why I'm here? I'm here because, as I said, I've been working on this problem for a very long time. The way that we write for screens is broken and has been broken for a long time. The current world of app development, right? The status quo is that you write 3 times or 4 times or 5 times or how many more times for screens you need to reach, right? I'm preaching to the choir here of Flutter developers. You all have been on the other side of this. But the problem here is no longer really so much technological. We have good technological solutions to this, Flutter being one of them. The problem here remains incentives. That platform companies, platform providers want you to write for their platform in a zero-sum game, right? Write for Android, and then, write in Java, and then it doesn't run on iOS, but that's good because we have more Android developers, right? I don't care so much about the platforms. I care about users. And as a user, I want you to write for me. As a business, I want it to be low cost to reach all my users. So I want you to write for users. And multi-platform, which is what I've been pushing at for, I don't know, nigh on 2 decades here, means about shipping to people, not platforms. And we thought the web was going to save us. I worked on the web for a very long time to try and make this true. The technological underpinnings, as amazing as they are, were not sufficient to have amazing app experiences. So we built Flutter. Flutter was great and all. I could only take it so far inside Google. And so I left Google to start a new company to see if I can take it further. Obviously, things take a long time to build. So we're in the small stage, but I am trying to build the Flutter company. I am trying to take Flutter further than I could inside Google. And the way that we first started with is Flutter CodePush. This was a product that we built, I don't know, we built 3 at least versions of CodePush inside Google. We're never able to ship any of them for various reasons. If you haven't heard of CodePush, it's a way of updating your app without waiting for the users to click that update button, right? It's a way of update without waiting for the stores, etc. You just ship the code straight to your app, just like the web works, right? If you've worked on a web project, you press deploy and like all your users got it, right? That's how mobile app works. And this is how mobile app should work. And this is how mobile app works for the very large apps, right? All of the largest apps work this way today, right? The YouTubes, the Facebooks, the TikToks, they all have built their own CodePush solution because, their teams aren't NASA either, right? They can't deal with the idea of that they can't change their code for 3 months until, every last one of their billion users has updated. They need to be able to ship, right away as well. Anyway, so I'm going to talk a little bit about CodePush today. I'm going to give you a brief demo in case you haven't seen it. And then I'm mostly going to kind of wander through some medium level sort of architecture stuff. Again, stop me at any time to ask questions. And then I'm happy to answer any questions you got. So as I said, if you haven't heard of CodePush, it's instant updates. This is how the web works. This is how the React Native and Ionic communities works. This is how the large apps works. The reason why CodePush exists is that large businesses whereby which their apps are their business, downtime is a real problem. Here in the United States, we have a thing called Black Friday. It's a big retail day. I don't know if this is also true in Cape Town, but businesses sometimes make half their revenue, right, on one day, or one series of days. You can't be down for that, right? And so you need the ability to know that even if something breaks in your back end and you can't fix it, you can push a fix to all of your users immediately. And without this, obviously, again, lost revenue. This was a big piece missing for adopting Flutter. I was constantly called into, the only way you could meet with like Google from as like a customer perspective was be a cloud customer. So I got called into these cloud customer meetings where the person on the other side of it actually wanted to talk to me and sign a contract with me, the Flutter team. Not that I'm special or anything, but like that was the thing that they cared about what Google was offering. But we could never sell them, solutions, and they constantly would ask for CodePush. So we built it. Anyways, we built it, we shipped it. It works great. It's been out for a while. We shipped Android over a year ago. We shipped iOS earlier this year. We ship a few thousand, we support a few thousand teams right now, and we support millions of patches every month, or we ship, help people distribute millions of patches every month. This is kind of far away from you all geographically, but you might have heard of GDG. They're the largest classified provider in Canada. They used to be part of eBay. Anyways, they're one of our large customers. They buy tens of millions of patches every month. Just as an example of that, we've been out there a long time and shipping on large apps. Another common question we get about CodePush is, is this safe? Can I use it? Yes, as I said, this is the way that lots of apps work. We in particular, because we are changing code, we know that code is important. We know that you don't want somebody to exploit your app or to see your code or all these things. We take a bunch of safety precautions to make it safe for you. Patches are verified on device. So like when you ship a patch, we help make sure that patch is came from you and is the patch that you intend, before applying it on the device. We support automatic rollback of failures as well as manual rollback of patches, so you can uninstall patches remotely. We never see your source. This is important, particularly for some of the big fintechy kind of people that we work with. Obviously, it varies for different apps. We are a release time only product, so we only work on those artifacts that you would normally send to the stores. And obviously, we track the latest versions of Flutter constantly. Common question is this allowed? It's explicitly allowed by both stores. If you read the store agreements, they talk about the ability to update. The restrictions that iOS has that has to be interpreted. We'll talk a little bit about what an interpreter is later on, but it's a specific way of running code, and Dart didn't have one before, and so we built one. Android is very similar. Their restrictions are a little bit looser. They'll accept a virtual machine or an interpreter. So anyways, but let's cut to a demo. Let me see if I know how to change my sharing setup here. I should have shared a different piece of my screen, but we'll try again. This one, entire screen. No idea if this will work. Do you see me? I'm frozen for me.
Nothing as yet.
Okay, we have a meeting. I don't think it's pinned. We just need to pin it quickly. Is it pinned?
There we go.
Yeah. Cool.
Here. Oh, sorry, I shared the wrong one.
Okay.
I apologize. Let me present something else. Entire screen. There we go. This time with feeling. All right. All right. So let's do a demo. Just for sake of convenience and speed, I'm going to start from a Flutter init, which is something I can't see you all as much. You're on a smaller screen now, but which is just a very small Flutter project, right? I think most of the folks in this room have. Sorry, that wasn't what I meant. I meant Flutter create. Hi, Cape Town. All right, so I've now created an empty Flutter project, which again, many of you have done before in your life. So I'm going to go code-r, hi Cape Town, and reopen that. Right, you've seen this style project before. It's just the counter app. We'll go through the code here in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and add Shorebird to this. Shorebird is our CodePush solution, right? So Shorebird is super fast to add. Shorebird init. It's asking me, do I want to share it with my other people in my team or just myself? I'm going to keep it to myself for the moment. Yes, I want it to be called Hi Cape Town. That's it. I have added Shorebird to my app. We're done. The changes that this made, pardon me, are that it added a YAML file, a Shorebird YAML, and it changed my pub spec to ship that as an asset. And that's it. That's all we do. We just need some identifier through which to understand if we look at this thing, what does it contain? It just contains a safe to be checked in, safe to be public, just unique identifier for your app so that we can identify your app and send it the right patches. Okay, and then so now that we've added Shorebird, let's go ahead and compile with it so we can see it. So to do that, we do Shorebird release, and we'll just do Android for this demo. So Shorebird is a release-only product. We only change your release time flows. So you would generally hook us up on your CI. I'm not doing a CI demo here. I'm doing a local demo, but the same. Like we have just a drop-in GitHub action. So then you generally just set up Shorebird for your CI, and you forget about it, and you never have to think about it again, other than be able to you then have the option of using Shorebird patch when you need to distribute to users immediately. So this is what your CI would do: is it would be running Shorebird release Android or Shorebird release iOS. You can actually even build multiple at the same time. We're going to go ahead and make this release. So this just called. I pulled down the exact version of Flutter that you specified. In this case, it defaults to the latest Flutter, and then it built with it. It just used Flutter build under the covers. It gives you the resulting AAB that you would typically ship to the Play Store or wherever else you would ship it. We work with a bunch of customers who distribute through other stores or distribute through APKs or with MDM, that sort of thing, enterprise setups. So now that we have this, we're going to go ahead and run this on our emulator just so you can see what it is. The way to do that is Shorebird preview. Clear this here. Shorebird preview. Oops, I can't spell. So what Shorebird preview is doing is this is going to offer to download a previously saved release. So when you make that release, it saves it on our servers for your later use, which we'll talk about here in a minute. And then this offers to download and run a later release. So you could use this to run a release you made, 3 months ago, or longer. And some people use this to distribute their QA, etc. But Shorebird preview downloads this older release. And the reason why we have this functionality is so that we can get the exact version of the release that you want in order to test your patches on. But here we're just using it to put it on the device, that release that we just made. So here it is. This is the app that we just built and ran. This is a release build running on an Android emulator of just the Flutter, stock Flutter. So let's go ahead and change this now. If we pull up the code here, we can make all sorts of changes, right? So we can change things to say this to be Hi Cape Town, and we can change it to be red or whatever. We can change any amount of Dart code. We could even add pub packages in this. Here I'm just going to change some logic. And you've seen this demo, obviously, in the context of hot reload. What I'm about to show you is not hot reload. This is updating a release build over the air to all of your customers. So I'm going to close out preview here, and now I'm going to go ahead and build this changed code as Shorebird patch, and we're going to be patching Android. And here again, it's going to ask me which release am I patching, because you can send the same patched code to as many releases as you want. Here we're just going to send it to just this one code that this one release that we just made. So it's going to download that save release. It's going to build your new code that you just made. It's going to compare them. It's going to figure out what changed between them. If native code or assets or things that we can't patch changed, it will warn you about that. But here, obviously, in this case, we just changed Dart code. And for the Dart code, it will then create a patch. And you'll see this patch is larger than sometimes, but still pretty small, right? This is a small image is all this is. That is being downloaded basically to each of your users. As soon as I press yes, it immediately distributes it to all my users, which obviously this demo is just me running on my emulator. We also have a staging system where you can instead stage this patch before you go up. But for this demo, I ran it in a mode whereby which it's going to immediately send it out. So I hit yes. It's going to create the patch. It's going to upload to our CDN, and it's going to start distributing to users. So users are now starting to update I mean, again, for this app, there's all of one user on my machine, to my published patch 1. So if I go back, so say I'm this user, I was running it. By default, you can change this, but by default, the way that Shorebird is set up in your app is to be maximally user-friendly and run silently in the background. So we never show them an update dialog or anything like that. We just we just sort of magically update their app for them behind the scenes. So here, if I relaunch this app, it will not have changed this time because it is doing the magic update right now in the background. There's nothing magic about it, but it's doing the silent update. And if I relaunch it another time, we've now updated. So that's it. So you now with Shorebird have the ability to update your users without waiting for anybody. So let's go back to the slides here. So let's talk a little bit about how this works, because it's not at all magic. Yeah, despite me using that phrase, it's all just code. So we're going to talk through sort of the big major pieces of it. Some of it you may hear about, some of you may not. So as I said, it's designed to do immediate updates to all over the world, to all of your users right away. You can update any Dart code, including adding and removing patches. We did a very simple update in this, but again, you can add as much Dart code as you want. You do eventually run into sort of policy restrictions. So the stores don't want you to, say, fundamentally change the purpose of your app or engage in deceptive behavior. So don't do that. But from a technical compliance perspective, you can change any amount of your app as long as it's Dart code. We designed it to be maximally developer friendly. What you saw was we were just replacing, we were doing it locally, but essentially on your CI, you're just replacing your Flutter build command on your CI with Shorebird release. That's all you're doing. You to make no changes to your code. We didn't ever go change the code other than to do our demo change. And you can add it to even a very large app in under 5 minutes. I mean, you watched me add it to this in a minute, right? We talked about the safety before. We can talk about it more. We've designed it very much to comply with what the stores want you to do, to do the sort of common update mechanics in the ways that they want. We also have a free plan. You can try it without paying us any money, etc. It doesn't affect your app if it's not used, if it can't reach our servers. Obviously, we're very aware that like people use mobile on a subway, and sometimes when the internet is flaky, we never get in the way of the functionality of your app. We do everything silently in the background, etc. So to achieve that, we had to build a whole bunch of stuff. We're almost a 2-year-old company now. We spent a long time building a lot of this stuff because it turns out it takes a lot of pieces to do this. We built that Shorebird CLI, which you saw. We have forks of the Flutter engine and the Dart code, which you can go read. Most of that is all public on GitHub. Our updater library, again, almost all of our code is public on GitHub. Our updater library is all in Rust. That's the thing that actually talks to our servers from your app. And then we have a Shorebird package CodePush, which I didn't show you today, but this is how you can control at a much finer grain about when the updates run and how they run and whether you block the user, all that stuff. It's a Dart package to control the underlying updating mechanism. We talked about Shorebird release. We have to see that this is the thing you stick in your CI. It's the packaging mechanism that just replaces Flutter build. It uses Flutter build. The big thing that we do is that we help you control the Flutter version precisely. We need to record some information when making that release to make sure that you can safely then patch it, right? We want to record the exact version of Flutter that was used to make that release, so that then when we run patch, we have this FVM-like functionality where we pull down that exact version of Flutter so that we can run it again. Yeah, and then Shorebird patch, we also showed this, right? So this is it's also a Flutter build replacement, but this is on the patch side. This is a new pipeline for your CI that maybe you use every day, maybe you use once a month, maybe you hold for emergencies. We have customers use this in lots of different ways, but this is the way to ship immediately. And we'll talk a little bit about the differential updating that it does, the differencing that it makes with the release build, et cetera, and more. The updater, I didn't really talk about this much at all. This is a small Rust binary that we build into the engine. This is the whole reason why we had to fork the Flutter engine at all, was that we needed to insert this small amount of Rust code, which knows how to talk to our servers, which knows how to, verify the signature of the patch, which knows how to, install the patch, which knows how to provide Dart, different binary, different, function implementations when it needs it, etc. This again is all open source. You can go read it. It's on it's on GitHub. And then there's some other stuff like you saw, Shorebird preview. We didn't show the console at all today. Here's a little preview of an old snapshot of our console, where you can access, rollback, analytics. You can collaborate with. We recently launched organization support, where so you can have share groups of apps with groups of people. We seem to be quite popular in the white label app community, where I think in that mode where people are trying to ship 1,000 apps to the store, we can help you ship 1,000 apps to all of your users instantly. And that's what something like an organization is designed to do, allow you to share a whole set of apps to a whole set of people. We do have CI integrations, again, documentation about how to wire us up for GitHub, and we have a GitHub Action, CodeMagic, etc., and various other stuff. So when people ask me about how does CodePush work, most often they're actually asking, so how does the Dart part work, right? How did we make a language that uses ahead of time compilation and is not designed with release time updatability in mind, release time updatability in mind? How do we make it release time updatable? And so let's talk through that, right? So as I mentioned or alluded to before, the biggest thing that we did was we added an interpreter to Dart. We'll talk about what an interpreter is in a second. We also changed the Dart runtime to be able to use this interpreter on a per function basis. So when you patch your app, you are, yes, you could replace all of the Dart code, but in reality, you're typically replacing a tiny subset of the Dart code in your app. And I say that even if you're making a large change in your app, because a lot of your app is the Flutter framework, right? And so we designed our whole system so that it operates on a per function basis, so that when you are changing your app, we are only updating the actual functions you changed. We built a whole a linker setup. It's not technically a linker by the traditional sense, but anyway, it's a way of understanding which functions are changing, and we updated the whole Dart compiler to make it possible to do this. So if you don't remember your compiler class in university, or if you like me didn't take a compiler class in university, interpreters are just programs that can run other programs. It's very common to have interpreted languages. So Lua is an example. Lua has a JIT2. JavaScript also has a JIT2, but JavaScript is also often interpreted. Basically, often interpreters work from source. In our case, they don't work from source, but they're just a way of saying, oh, it's an if. Okay, I'll run my if code. Oh, this is a while. I'll run my while code. And like it just block by block goes through and executes your program, which is different than how your program is typically executed with a compiler, where it will be compiled down to machine code and then the machine code will be executed. That's how a JIT works. So a JIT is just a fancy compiler that you ship the compiler as part of the program, or ship the compiler as part of some runtime, and you compile your program right as you're running it. That's how hot reload works, but not how Shorebird works. Anyway, so we had to write an interpreter, and we built one specifically for store compliance. The way that we wrote our interpreter, again, is on this per function basis, and was really only possible because of some weirdnesses in Dart. Dart started as a JIT-only language a very long time ago. It was intended to be in Chrome and replace JavaScript. Obviously, that never happened. But because of this design, it keeps around a bunch of information at runtime that is just not really used typically by your program, but was still there and allowed us to design a system this way, where when it's doing function dispatch, we can intercept that and say, aha, this function, we're replacing this function, which we'll talk a little bit more about. What we interpret is actually intentionally a very low-level format, which is atypical for interpreters. We do that for a couple reasons. The biggest one is safety. Because Dart operates in this ahead-of-time compilation system, we want to make sure that what we end up interpreting is absolutely identical to what would have been run if it had gone all the way through the Dart compiler. And so we run it as late in the pipeline as possible. we also do it so that, you know, we never see your source code, which again is important for some of our customers and less important for others. Another question, if you've worked with interpreters, again, I don't know how much of a compiler crowd this is. Again, I was not a compiler person until I got into this job. But I don't know how much you've worked with interpreters, but interpreters are slow because they are just another several layers of intermediation between you and the OS. This was an initial problem. So when we shipped our very first version of Shorebird for iOS, we interpreted everything. And that resulted in, and Dario may be able to tell you the stories because he's been a long time Shorebird user. But we interpreted everything and it made apps slower, like 2, or 3x slower. And so we knew we had to do better. And so we built a system that avoids ever using the interpreter if possible. That's why we do this per function work. And our current system is generally quite good at that. And generally, even for large changes, you will end up running 99% of your code on the CPU and only interpreting 1%. And yeah, and we talked a little bit about, so these were changes that we had to make to the Dart runtime in order to make that sort of per function switching possible, and the linker that we built in order to do that. Yes, okay, so then I also wanted to tell you briefly, again, about the compiler, and I'll show an example of this. One of the things that you may not know, and you honestly you have no reason to need to know about the Dart compiler, is that the Dart compiler is what I would describe as a chaotic system. And that's neither really a compliment nor a dig. It's just sort of a little weird that when you make a small change in your program, you can end up dramatically changing the output. And this is true of sort of any small change you make to your program. And that's just because of the way that it happens to walk through your program in terms of compiling. I'll show you an example. Anyways, this non-determinism, or it's deterministic. So it's not non-deterministic. So this is deterministic behavior, but like changing wildly on small inputs fought against our system. And so we had to go through and change the compiler substantially in order to remove this. So here's an example of the kind of change that we needed to make. So typically, if you're writing this foo bar function on the left, right, and then you want to change it and you want to add just print B to foo, you would think that this makes no changes to how bar executes. But it does, in fact. And so if you look at this, what's actually happening here, this is an example. There's lots of this kind of example, but this is an example specifically around how constants are handled in compilers, including in the Dart compiler. So a constant inside a compiler is typically, you don't embed it in the stream of compiled code. So when you compile this code, it doesn't actually embed A in the compiled code. What it does is it writes a number in that place. So it says, hey, foo, I'm running foo. Let me load up constant number 1 into a variable, and I'm going to print whatever's in that variable. That's how this actually gets compiled. And so what happens is that as the Dart compiler is walking this, is it gives all these constants numbers, like A gets 1, and Y gets 2, and then A gets 1, and Z gets 3. And so if you add B, it means that Y is now going to get 3, which was previously Z. And Z is now going to get 4. And so you have, by changing foo, you have changed the compiled output of bar as well, which may be unexpected, but it's just sort of how, I think it's pretty common for how compilers work. Anyway, so we had to fix this. So our Dart compiler doesn't just take your source code as an input. It takes your source code plus your previous release binary. It's one of the reasons why we save it for you. And so when we're running our compiler, we look at that release binary and we say, oh, how did you number the constants? Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll use your same numberings. Thanks. And a whole bunch of other similar things like this. So we have to do a weighted sort of your constant table and your class table and your dispatch table. Yeah, it's a whole bunch of stuff that honestly is like far too detailed for, yeah, it's not important. But we did a whole bunch of hard stuff so that you don't have to, is really the TLDR. Anyways, I think I've used a good chunk of my time, or of our time together. And so I want to sort of get out of the slides and maybe get back to answering any and all questions that I can. But in summary, we build CodePush. We had actually, again, at Google, we built a variety of CodePush meshes, not one anywhere near as crazy as this one, but we built and shipped CodePush. It's used by a whole bunch of people. It works very well. It works today. It's very easy to add. We talked a little bit about how, yeah, that's kind of all my slides. I'm very easy to find on the internet. Should I ever be of use to you? And I'm also otherwise just happy to stick around and answer questions and otherwise be helpful to folks.
Okay, cool. Yeah, it seems like we still have some time, so we open to 1 or 2 or 3 questions. The people online can just add their questions to the chat section if you have questions online. Maybe I can just start off and with a simple one. Mainly with like over the updates, are you able to incrementally do the updates? Maybe first start off with 20% of your user base. If there are any bugs, roll back. Like what's the situation with that?
We're in the process of adding that now. We don't have percentage-based rollouts. We have basically we have a big on-off switch and we have a staging environment right now. But we're in the process of adding percentage-based rollouts. It won't be much longer. So we'll have that soon.
Cool. We have a question at the back. I think the speaker should be able to be audible.
Yeah, okay, I'll try to speak loudly.
Yeah.
Hi, Eric. Very great presentation. I'm very curious about the costs associated. I can imagine if you sort of storing these releases in the cloud and you're shipping to sort of millions of users, there must be a cost associated. So is there a cost to the developer for the releases?
So right now, the only thing we charge for is patch distribution. This whole business side, obviously, it's my responsibility as the guy in charge, but is new to somebody who's been 20 years an engineer. So we're figuring that parts out. But right now, we charge a base fee of. So first of all, we charge nothing if you're shipping fewer than 5,000 installs in a month. So for a small project or trying it out or whatever. But if you're shipping more than that, we charge $20 a month for access to the system, which includes shipping 50,000 installs. So if you have 10,000 users and you're shipping 5 times a month, that's all covered in the $20 a month plan. And then beyond that, we charge $1 for 2,500 installs. And that can get pretty pricey for somebody who has 100 million, user app or that sort of thing. And so at large, when you start getting into the millions of users, you call us up and we'll strike some sort of deal. We have sort of committed usage discounts available for large apps. But most people doing most apps honestly just fit in our $20 plan and happily use that to ship to their 10,000 users sort of thing.
Oh, thank you.
We have another question.
Thanks for the presentation. Would you ever consider building this for another framework, or would you just stick to Flutter? Flutter be the only one?
It's very Flutter specific, or rather, it's very Dart specific. I don't think so. So the stores have funny restrictions specifically around the things that are called native. Like they have specific restrictions around that you can't update Swift code and you can't update Java code, and so it's sort of like okay, so it's like Dart has this nice property of not being one of those, and more in the bucket of the JavaScripts and the Luas of the world. Like obviously every game, right? They can ship their own Lua code, and just a web view, right? Ships JavaScript code all the time. So Dart is in that bucket, and so is updatable. But the changes we had to make were very Dart specific. So I don't think we would probably do this. I think it's much more likely, as I said, I wish to be the Flutter company. It's much more likely, and I think it's soon, that we will end up shipping more products specific to Flutter rather than us becoming the CodePush company for lots of different kinds of CodePush.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe like let's say if we have any question or questions so far.
One more question. I'm coming from the side. Just wondering around the business side of it and about getting the word out. As you're getting started with this, did you already have a whole list of people just sitting waiting for this to come out? It was really easy to get out from a business side. Kind of getting those first paying users in. I'd be keen to hear just a little bit of that journey.
Yes and no. We definitely built something that people wanted, so that's good, and that made it easier. Having my previous company that I started, 17 years ago and took venture capital for, we did not build something people wanted, and so getting people to use it was always hard. This is definitely the opposite. People want this product. I think the biggest learning for me is I'd only ever been on the other side of enterprise purchasing. Like I'd only been the guy signing the checks inside Google. I'd never been the person who's like has to figure out how to sell into your organization. And so that has been very strange to me, learning how to do the sales dance correctly. So I think there's still so much for us to learn on the business side. And as you said, by getting the word out, I would estimate that, there are millions of monthly Flutter, or there's at least 1 million monthly Flutter actives, Flutter active users, right? I would guess maybe 100,000 people. Maybe 100,000 Flutter users have ever heard of us. I think we had something on the order of 12,000 signups last year. Obviously, that's a lot of people, but it's like nothing compared to the number of Flutter users in a month, right? So I think we have so many people still to reach, and I have to learn so much about marketing and like how do you even like help people know you exist.
Great, thanks.
I've got one more question.
Okay, cool. So I have a question.
Eric, would you consider having Shorebird as part of Flutter? When you create a Flutter app, just have it there installed by default, maybe in a off-the kind of way.
I think so. I think that it may end up going the other way. I think Flutter is wonderful. Obviously, I started it and led it for so long. But one of the things that I learned through leading Flutter and now through leading Shorebird is that the incentives that I operated under inside Google was to build a thing for Google. And so the Flutter that we produced ended up being a puzzle piece that fit really nicely inside the Google puzzle. But it turns out that the rest of the world does not have the rest of the puzzle pieces that Google has. And that's not like out of malice or whatever. It's not like Google's trying to hide them away. It's just like, you just don't use Bazel. You don't, you have a giant monorepo. You don't, you don't have like a special file system for handing your, build artifacts in the cloud, right? Like they have a weird system, right? And so Flutter, I think that businesses want to buy a thing, not a piece of a thing. And so I think that like you end up with Red Hat for Linux, or any of these like companies that like help a business actually consume an open source project. I think that Shorebird may end up that way, where it's not that you can't just go use Flutter from Google. Great, go have a good time. But if you're a business, you might want to come talk to me and us to shake hands, and you to be able to walk away from that knowing that you will be successful with Flutter, knowing that we are providing you all of the business integrations that you need that are not specific to Google, but rather are designed around how you do business. And so again, CodePush is just the start of that. So the question, do I think we'll end up as part of Flutter? Probably not. I think it may go the other way, that a business might come and get the Shorebird Flutter rather than Shorebird being part of Flutter.
Cool. I think maybe another question from myself. I think we still have time, so if you guys have some questions that you want to ask, there's still time, about 20 minutes or so. So
I have no hard stop.
Yeah, my question was with the actual releases or like the updates. I know you can specify the release that you wanna send the patch to. My question is that it can happen that, say, because the native platforms change so quickly, maybe something Android doesn't support anymore, and then you're sending that patch to that release, yet that phone cannot handle that patch. So does Shorebird look at the individual phone itself and see if it's the update is gonna come to the phone. It's updated. And for example, if something's obviously can crash on phones, if like it's no longer supported by that Android version or whatever. Yeah.
So Shorebird never will update across a Flutter boundary. And by that, I mean a Flutter engine boundary. So like, or maybe, so let me rephrase that. So when you send to an older release, we will use the exact copy of Flutter that you built that release with. So you can have changed your code, but that code needs to then be able to compile with that older release, which most of the time it does, because honestly, Dart, modern Dart, works on a Dart compiler of 2 years ago, generally pretty well. So that's the restriction. We don't ever change any of the native bits, any of the parts that are gonna like crash on that funny Android, because it's as though we took your modern code and took it back in time, to a year ago or whenever you made that release, and we use that exact version of Flutter that you used on that day to build that release to compile this one. So I think we've just avoided that entire class of bugs. We've not, I don't think ever yet, had any sort of device-specific Shorebird difficulties.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, it makes sense. Like those native changes, like in the specific iOS or Android, normally the problem child, if you can put it like that. Cool. Do we have any questions? Maybe you can check online as well, Ugo. If like any chats, there's nothing. Okay, I think that's pretty cool. I think we also did. Any final words?
Just to say a big thank you for coming out and having a chat with us. It's been an absolute honor to hear from you. And yeah, everyone, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And you don't have to take my word for it. Dario has used Shorebird, and you can just ask him. Whether it actually works. Anyways, thank you all for the time. You all have a wonderful evening. Take care.
Enjoy. Bye.
Cool.
I think you're going to share your screen.
Okay, cool. Hey, cool. We've made it to the end of the show. I'd like you guys to give yourself a round of applause. No, it's been really great. Love the questions. I love the interactions. The speakers were wonderful. I think they were the VIPs of this session. They still like, if you had like any burning questions at the end for Wisani, they're still here. You can ask them at the end of this event. There's still a bit of time for networking, few minutes before we get kicked out of this venue. But thank you very much. Like always, I think I mentioned that we do have a bigger event coming up in November. GDG Cape Town Belfast will like one of our bigger events of the year, and it will be based in Worcester. So if you have been RSVP'd, do that. If you know that your company might be willing to sponsor, we got a sponsorship pack as well. So depending on your budget, we can make it work. So feel free to talk to myself, Ugo, and the rest of the team if you are interested in that. And yeah, I'll end to that. In terms of we normally do a draw for like the vouchers, the licenses. I'm just trying to think this time how we're gonna do it. But since
I think we should continue what we've done. So after the event tomorrow, you will receive an email and with a survey link. So take your surveys, and from the surveys, we'll draw a raffle draw from people who sent the surveys, and we'll notify you. Okay.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's clear. So yeah, even the people online as well, you'll get that email. And yeah, let's round of applause, and we're done for the night.
Cool.